Science and Culture in the Western Tradition is a television course created by International Video Connection Incorporated and Coastline Community College in association with the South Carolina Educational Television Network.
To order the $39 companion book to TV Ontario's new series, Science and Culture in the Western Tradition, please have your Visa or MasterCard ready and call Toronto 967-1402. Outside Toronto, call toll-free 1-800-268-1121. In either case, ask for extension 12.
Beginning Friday at 8, TV Ontario presents a remarkable series called Love Law.
In this series of films, we're exploring an area that's public and private at the same time. The way people's love lives fit into the community's life, with all its rules and customs and laws.
The first episode deals with teenage love in 4 countries: Japan.
There may be sexual passion in the love comics and romantic passion on stage, but real young lovers in Japan seem to us to have their emotions well under control.
Kenya.
Men are such liars. Less 1 out of 100 can be truthful.
India.
Of all the countries we visited, India was the only one that seemed to have a successful way of dealing with the problem of young love. They don't allow it.
And the United States.
This is a part of the world where young love has achieved the status of competition.
Love Law begins Friday at 8 on TV Ontario.
In my life, I've met, among the Chinese communists, people who were crushed, killed, thrown alive into boilers, and destroyed in all sorts of ways. It's for them, the dead, that I write.
The words of André Malraux in praise of the Chinese heroes who battled colonialism in the 1920s. Malraux's fascination with the cult of the hero led him to immortalize many such figures in his writing. Nor was he above fighting himself, organizing the España Squadron during the Spanish Civil War.
I did several flights with him. During the bombardments, Malraux was in the plane, just to be able to say, I'm here too. I'm not on the ground sending you to your deaths.
Later, Malraux would play a key role in the French resistance, and it was this combination of artist and activist that drew the attention of a French hero, General Charles de Gaulle. As de Gaulle's Minister of Cultural Affairs, Malraux resumed his lifelong interest in the arts. The Metamorphosis of André Malraux, Friday at 9 on TV Ontario. This is TV Ontario, Channel 59 in Chatham, Channel 9 in Thunder Bay.
Now from the Provincial Legislature in Queen's Park, videotape coverage of today's question period.
Oral questions. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start today with some questions to the Minister of Housing. The public was informed on Friday by a newspaper, not by the Minister or by the Ministry, that Mr. Getz-Gadden, who had been the Minister's executive assistant as well as that of her predecessor, the member for Scarborough North, had been suspended. But he wasn't suspended this last Friday. He'd been suspended for over a week. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister can explain how it would be possible that a senior policy advisor to the Ministry of Housing would be suspended for a week without the public or the legislature being informed.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very glad to be able to answer the question for the member. On June 29th, I was advised of some allegations about this individual and launched an internal investigation. On the 30th of June, this individual was suspended. My deputy then consulted with lawyers at the Attorney General's and also with legal counsel with Mr. Getz-Gadden and his counsel. The allegations were determined to be not frivolous, as Mr. Brown from the Attorney General's office, Attorney General's ministry has said. We were advised by the Attorney General that the matter should be turned over to the police, and we felt it was appropriate at that time to issue a public statement. Let me say to the member opposite that I assume that he knows this, that under normal circumstances, when there is an investigation of this sort and a suspension of this sort, it is not made public. We decided it was important to make it public in these circumstances because of the rumors and allegations that fly about various matters, and I believe that we did the right thing.
Supplementary?
Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, very directly to the Minister, what she has said is is nonsensical. If there is a police investigation of a senior employee of the government of this province, is the minister suggesting for a moment that the public are not entitled to be told that there is such an investigation and that an employee has been suspended? A suspension is a public act by this government of an employee. It's not some private decision by the minister, some deal between the minister and the employee. It's something which is determined as a public act. I want to ask the minister again, why did it take you 8 days, and the fact that the information became public and went to the Toronto Star before your ministry even issued any kind of a statement as to why Mr. Getsgaden had been suspended?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me make it clearer. There was...
Why don't you be quiet? Order.
This is a very serious matter,
right.
and I am interested in sharing this information as fully as I can. As I said, the allegations were investigated for a number of days. When we were advised by the Attorney General's office that the matter should be turned over to the police, we also issued a public statement so that it would be apparent to everyone what we had done. Let me also say to the member opposite, and I am sure that he is concerned about this matter, it is important to respect the basic civil rights awarded to any employee in this province. If we had not acted to protect the employment rights of the individual in question, I am absolutely certain that the member opposite, who is the leader of the opposition, would be standing in this House right now denouncing me for not protecting the employment rights of the individual in question. Allegations have been made. A full investigation is underway. When the results of that investigation are complete, appropriate action will be taken.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister decided on June the 30th to suspend Mr. Getsgaden. That's a fact. Now, you don't suspend an employee on frivolous grounds. You suspend an employee for reasons. You have to give the employee reasons for suspending him or her. So this is well beyond the police, before the police investigation. I want to ask the minister, is she now in a position to tell us what is the nature of the allegations that have been brought against Mr. Getsgaden?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me say that there are two things that we had to do here. One was to protect the public trust, and the other is to protect the legal rights of the employee. All the allegations will be fully investigated. But I have been...
Order.
You're asking questions from both sides of your mouth, Mr. Leader of the Opposition.
Always. Order.
And I'm trying to answer them.
Right on.
The allegations are being investigated. When the results of those investigations are available, then we will follow an appropriate course of action. I have been advised by the Attorney General's office that it is not appropriate for me to comment any further until those investigations are completed.
New question.
Spending all the members
Order.
against whom they are
New question, and to which minister?
It's interesting that the Premier's own conduct with regard to many of your colleagues, Minister, are completely different from those.
Thank you. You have a question to which minister?
Mr. Speaker, I have a question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has told us that when he met with NVAC Resources, he's told me in the House that he didn't realize that Mr. Mutso had appeared before the Waysburg inquiry back some 15 years before, that he'd been quoted as saying that the only time bribery worried him was when it didn't work. Testimony before the Commission. Premier stated that he had no idea that Mr. Mutso was involved in the purchase of his family's company. I wonder if the Premier can tell us, since he didn't, according to his statements in this House, have any idea about either of those things, can the Premier tell us, did he have any idea at that time as to how lucrative the contract would be between whoever it was who was disposing of Metropolitan Toronto's garbage and the GTA's garbage and the public of Ontario?
Premier?
Can I just be as fair as I possibly can be, because I understand the charges that are being made, and many of them unfair, and my friend, I think, has made many of them that are factually incorrect. Again, you're factually incorrect. There is no contract between anybody and the disposition of garbage. Now, why don't you stand up and say it? You would try to give the impression that there is a contract. Surely, as a member of the bar and someone who has more integrity in this House would want to stand up and say that you understand that no contract has been given by the GTA, by the regions, or anybody else to any waste disposal group. Why don't you exercise some responsibility for a change?
Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if the Premier wants to pretend that a contract is not being planned and that there is not something in the works, then I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that he is living in a different universe from the one occupied by most decision makers in this province. Mr. Speaker, according to the minutes taken at the meeting of June the 23rd, it says, and I quote, "The Premier at one point asked about funding, and you outlined some variety of methods he wanted to think that one through. He asked, could it be privately funded to Marco, who said yes at this point. I outlined the rough cash flow to support Marco." Mr. Speaker, we now have from the Metro Works Commissioner, Bob Ferguson, to Metro Council, a memo dated July the 5th, which talks about the cost to Metropolitan Council alone of an increase in tipping fees from the current $83 to $150 in terms of what that will mean for the so-called short-term landfill between 1992 and 1996.
Question?
Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Premier again. In the discussions that you had with Mr. Muzzo, did you discuss the costs of this venture, and did you discuss the question as to whether it would be privately funded and run on a private profit basis, or whether it would be operated on some other basis?
Thank you, Premier.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell my honourable friend things he already knows but chooses to overlook. First of all, there is no contract and will be no contract with this government. If, in fact, there are any contracts in the future, they will be with the regional municipalities who have the responsibility for landfill and garbage disposal. Our role is only a facilitating one and a coordinating one and a helpful one. Let me say to my honourable friend, no decision has been made on whether, in fact, to let a contract or whether, in fact, it is public sector, private sector, or some mix thereof. Whether it's the picking up of the garbage, whether it's the recycling, the reuse, whether it's the transportation on rail, if, in fact, that develops. Obviously, whatever is done is going to be done in complete scrutiny with 100% analysis by everyone involved, and there are many, I believe 12, private sector companies that have ideas on how to contribute to this. As my honourable friend will know, there are people looking at every possibility that's been exercised around the world, and there are some exciting examples in Italy and Japan and a lot of other countries, I am told, as countries have to deal with this particular problem. So no decision has been made, and you've read on this matter, I am sure, the views of various regional chairmen who, with their councils, will make the final view, who have final disposition, who have a number of views on the private-public sector mix, if in fact there is any. So no decision has been made, and your attempt to give the impression that anybody has got a contract that is going to allow them to private at the public expense, I can tell you, is absolutely false. And I think in the interest of intellectual integrity, you should stand up and admit what you know.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I don't mind. I'll take lectures from the Premier of this province on many subjects. Integrity is not among them, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the memorandum from Mr. Beattie dated August the 10th, 1988 says we now have in Marco and Laidlaw the two most powerful developers in Canada who recognize that there is more money in burying garbage inland than building urban development on land. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is the basic policy question that I'm asking the Premier of this province to answer. I want the Premier of this province to tell us, why is it that this government, in its handling of this issue, has not stated clearly and categorically, because it's involved up to its eyeballs. Mr. Church and Mr. Fleming are involved in this decision, and the Premier knows it, and he knows it perfectly well. I want to ask him, it's going to cost if we go to the tipping fee suggested by NVAC up to $300 a ton, I want to ask the Premier, do you not recognize that this, in fact, is nothing more or less than a license to print money if we give it over to the private sector? Could be as much as $1.5 billion for the contingency land site alone. I want to ask the Premier, why not a clear and categorical statement that the disposal of garbage in southern Ontario will be handled on behalf of the public, by the public, and not by private developers on behalf of their investors?
Premier.
My honourable friend read that memo last week, and it gets him very excited if he hears anything about the private sector one way or the other. And he uses all these emotive words like profit, making profit and things like that. And he uses a bunch of figures that have no support in fact whatsoever, that might go to 150 a ton or 300 a ton, or why don't you say 500 or 1,000 a ton? There is no substantiation for anything you've done. No specific proposal, to the best of my knowledge, has been put forward. And I say to my honourable friend, no contract in any way has been concluded. Now, I just say this to my friend, because I think he understands this. Is it not impossible that there could be some sort of a mixture? For example, what are people going to do with the recycled materials at the end of the day? Are they going to use the private sector or the public sector to dispose of those? You see, I don't think there's been any conclusion to those kind of matters, but you would want to write that out completely as opposed to let anybody look at, in an intellectually honest way, all of the alternatives available. Let me say, if and when a contract is going to be let or a tender applied for, you will get a copy of that. And you can look at it, and you can make your judgments about whether it's right or wrong. You can look at the financing, whether it's public sector or private sector. And you can suggest how to raise taxes to do this, or how to do it on tipping fees, or how to finance it in the long term. Obviously, any contract of this size, and at this point, frankly, nobody knows for sure if any of the regions are going to participate, and if so, how, will be scrutinized by every politician, including yourself, by the public sector and the private sector, and everyone will have their view. You will have had an opportunity to canvass the world and bring your constructive wisdom to bear on this matter. But I say to my friend, you are continuing to be completely unfair in trying to give someone the impression that some contract has been awarded, some windfall to someone, when in fact that is not the case. And I think my friend, who usually uses better judgment in these matters, should continue to remember his responsibility.
New question, the member for Sarnia.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier as well. I want to revisit, if I might, for a moment, the Getz-Gadden matter that was spoken of earlier in the House by the Minister of Housing. We're informed that the Minister of Housing became aware of certain allegations with respect to Mr. Getz-Gadden on June the 29th, and that action was taken by the Minister on June the 30th. Mr. Premier, it was fully a week later before this matter was released publicly, or before any information came out in connection with the reasons for the suspension of Mr. Getz-Gadden. Now, considering, if you will, the substantial interest in Tridel and the Ministry of Housing at the moment, and certain allegations that relate to those associations, could you indicate whether you think a week's delay is appropriate under the circumstances?
Premier.
The Minister can help the honourable friend with all of the circumstances pertaining to that.
It's been referred to the Minister of Housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell the member opposite that when I received these allegations, I took them very seriously. I immediately contacted the people in my staff who really had to take on the responsibility of checking into them. On the 30th of June, they indeed began this investigation to find out what they could find out. The individual in question was suspended on that day, and conversations continued between the Deputy Minister and his legal advice, together with Mr. Getz-Gadden and his lawyers. That discussion went on for a while. If you recall, it was on Friday that June 30th was, and the long weekend intervened. That discussion went on for a while. After a while, it became clear that the Attorney General was going to give us the advice that we really should take this into the police so that the police would investigate further. That's the point at which we decided it was appropriate to make it public. We did make it public. At the moment, there's an investigation going on. When further information becomes available, we will act on that information when we have it.
Supplementary.
I'd like to advise the Minister that on July the 6th, about a week following the information that came to your attention, my House Leader, the Honourable Member for Nipissing, did in fact receive information regarding the activities and the allegations surrounding Mr. Getz-Gadden. And he took what I consider, Mr. Speaker, to be the appropriate action. At that time, he did two things. Number one, he referred the matter to the anti-racket squad of the OPP, and secondly, he went to the Deputy Premier, who was in the House at that time, shared the information with the Deputy Premier, and advised him that these allegations had come to our attention. Do you not think, Madam Minister, that the same kind of courtesy could have been extended to the members of the opposition as we extended to you under the circumstances?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We began this internal investigation almost instantaneously after we got the information, the allegations that were shared with me. It's important to respect the basic civil rights of any employee in this province, and I think that's a very important position to take. The individual was suspended and further investigations went on. It is only at the point at which it became clear that we were going to have to go the next stage and have the police continue with this investigation, we thought it was appropriate to make it public as we have. I believe we acted in accordance with our responsibility for the public trust, also our responsibility not to in any way undermine the employment rights of the individual in question. Look, the members of the public service in this province are people of integrity, as are the people in this House. We are talking about someone's livelihood and someone's life. I think it's appropriate to treat that carefully. This person was, in fact, suspended, and the work to investigate the allegations was begun immediately. At the point at which we decided that the police had to be brought in, we made that public so that everyone would know about it.
Final supplementary.
Madam Minister, perhaps you could indicate to us whether it is the OPP or the Metro Police that you called in, and secondly, what are, in fact, the terms of the suspension? Do you feel that the suspension was based on concrete circumstances that give you justification for the suspension? Because obviously that's the action that you have now taken. And are you prepared to share any of that information with the House at this time?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Mr. Brown of the Attorney General's office has said, the allegations were determined not to be frivolous. But I really don't think it's appropriate for me to say any more about that at this point. The advice that we have from the Attorney General's office is that it would be inappropriate to give you any more information than that pending the fuller investigation, and I have to respect that advice, which is legal advice to me, and I intend to keep it.
New question, the member for Leeds-Grenville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Last week he told the House that those who negotiated the Peterson-Avinda deal were not aware when they signed the deal that Marco Muso had an interest in Avinda. Such a version of events is not consistent with the known facts and is not credible. Avinda was on the verge of financial failure 6 months before it approached the Petersons to complete the $9.7 million purchase. No knowledgeable vendor would ever talk to such a purchaser until it revealed a substantial backer, who in this case was Marco Muso and his company. Is the Premier prepared to go back to those who negotiated the deal, confront them with the facts, and find out when they first knew Marco Muso was involved in the deal?
Speaker, I'm willing to take any kind of analysis you think is appropriate. As I said to my friend, why don't you refer it to the Conflicts Commissioner, because you've got some version of the situation. I can tell you, my honourable friend, that that isn't the facts you present in this House are not facts that I'm aware of. As a matter of fact, my guess is, from what I've heard, that they would stand up again and say you are wrong. However, you continue to do that in this House and make groundless allegations. But I say to my honourable friend, I am told that it was a letter of credit from the bank that supplied the financing for the situation.
Supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a much broader issue than conflict, and we have asked Justice Evans for a ruling on jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, as part of the sale, Mr. Muso's company, Consolidated HCI Holdings Corporation, agreed to lend $3 million to the Peterson family company. $3 million participants in a transaction don't come out of the blue. They're obviously connected to the deal. Is the Premier telling this House that his family company agreed to a $3 million loan from a company that was not the purchaser and never found out who controlled this lender before they signed the deal?
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't part of the deal that I told my honourable friend, but again, I say to you, I have no problem with this at all, and refer all your suggestions, your allegations to the Conflict Commissioner, and I will instruct my trustee to give him all the information that they have available, and then you can satisfy yourself that, again, you are into waters that are not correct, or you're making allegations that are foundless.
Well, Mr.
Final
Speaker,
supplementary.
if the Conflict Commissioner has jurisdiction, we'll certainly do that, but we do not intend to limit it to that. As I said, this is a much broader issue. Mr. Speaker, the real issue here is that the Premier's company should never have been sold to someone like Marco Muzo, who has so much business he wants to do with the province and so little appreciation of the need for public officials to appear objective. The Premier's answers raise more questions than they resolve. Is the Premier prepared to make all the facts public about this deal and clear the air? Does he have any compelling reason not to disclose everything about this deal right now?
Premier.
Reason, and that's why I say to you, I'm happy to turn it all over the Conflict Commissioner and who's a public official responsible to this House to look at every single detail. I have no problem with that. But do you have a problem? What I'd like you to do is stand up and go with your allegations and stand up and make these public charges. Then they can prove that you, my friend, make foundless allegations constantly in this House and that you demean being a member of Parliament in this province.
New question. Order. New question, the member for Wellington.
Mr. Speaker, I have a question of the Premier. Don Smith and the Ontario Liberal Party sent out an invitation a couple of months ago inviting people to participate in the second major event of 1989, and that's a gala performance of the Phantom of the Opera. Now, he didn't know at the time that the second major event of '89 for the Liberal Party was going to be the Holden Inquiry, but what he did was indicated that Marlene Del Zotto was going to be the chairperson of that mammoth fundraising event. I'm wondering if the Premier could tell us whether Marlene Del Zotto is indeed still the chairperson of this fundraiser, $200 a ticket, at which the Premier and his caucus are going to be present.
Premier? She was at that point, but she is withdrawn, obviously.
Supplementary.
Well, I suspect it wasn't because Patty Starr was available. I'm wondering if the Premier would tell us what he did or what other members of his government did to effect the withdrawal of Ms. Del Zotto, and why.
Premier.
What do you think? It's 20 questions. Why don't you take a guess at it?
New question, the member for Burlington South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for the Minister of Health. Madam Minister, last week I raised on several occasions the growing crisis of neonatal intensive care beds in this province. I'd like to raise with you the near-tragic case of John and Peter Sharp that were born 7 weeks premature last Friday morning at St. Joe's Hospital, because even though there was a perinatal bed available at Shadok for the mother, they could not accept her because there were no neonatal beds for the new infant children when they were born. The doctor struggled for 4 hours to save the baby's lives. The one twin was manually ventilated while the only available ventilator was used to save the other child. The ambulance was dispatched and it was discovered that the heating and ventilating systems on the incubator was not working.
Way to go.
Madam Minister, Mr. and Mrs. Sharp, in their anger and their helplessness, watched for 4 hours as doctors tried to desperately ventilate their 2 children. And they asked that you be asked one simple question. Do we have to lose 1 or 2 babies before your government realizes the crisis that you're facing with neonatal intensive care beds in this province?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, I don't think that there is a service which is as important as far as acknowledging Ontario's world leadership than both perinatal and neonatal services in the province of Ontario. We've developed a system within the province. You see, you have to make a choice. You either centralize all of your services in one place, or you develop a network of services across the province so that people have those services even closer to home. At certain times, any one of those centres can be stressed, but we know that services are available at another center nearby. Now, there are 13 hospitals providing perinatal services. We always prefer to have the mother and the babies, of course, as close to home as it can be, but a very significant network of land and air ambulances ensure that the mother in a high-risk situation is delivered in a hospital which provides that very intensive specialized service. I would inform him that St. Joseph's Hospital is not one of those hospitals. Centres are located not only in Hamilton, but in Toronto, in Kingston, in Ottawa, in London, as well as Windsor, Thunder Bay, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, and so forth. I would say to him that the network of those services attempt to ensure that women in high-risk situations and in premature births, you never know when the delivery is going to occur, try to make sure that she has access to the service that she needs as close to home.
Supplementary.
Minister, it's clear to these women who have high-risk pregnancies that the choices your government is forcing them to make are putting their babies at risk. I'd incite for you a second example. 2 days later, Sunday morning at 7 a.m., twins were born 10 weeks premature in Grimsby Hospital, and doctors began a frantic effort to save their lives. The doctors called for 2 ambulances to get them to Shadoke McMaster. The dispatcher on the other line from your ministry said, no, we will only send you 1 ambulance because if we send 2, there'll be no ambulances in the Hamilton and greater area. They suggested that an ambulance be called in from Niagara Falls, and the doctor suggested that the OPP be called to see if they could help. They dispatched a truck to the hospital with a neonatal nurse and an incubator. They dispatched an OPP truck down to the Grimsby Hospital. The fact is, it took 4 hours to get those children at risk into Shadoke McMaster. And when those Band-Aid approaches are unacceptable for life-saving newborns. So my question, Madam Minister.
Thank you very much.
Forcing doctors to make high-risk and desperate arrangements to save these newborns simply because you refuse to accept the growing number of high-risk births occurring in our province.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the member opposite that in fact we rely on expert advice as to what the total capacity within the system should be. At the present time, we are surpassing the capacity that was recommended. That doesn't mean that at any one time you don't have a situation where one is stressed. I can tell him that we are always reviewing. We're working closely with the hospitals to determine what the needs can be, and I want to assure him that as we work with the hospitals, we want to make sure that we have...
Order. I don't think the member really wants the response. New order. 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 Order.
You have no right to make that.
Order. Order. No. Member 24B, when a member is speaking, no other member shall participate except in the point of order. Order. New question. The member for Simcoe Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Minister of the Environment. Recent studies on the effect of smog, particularly ozone, have shown that serious lung injury may be inflicted by this type of pollutant. We are all aware how under certain weather conditions, smog seems to accumulate in the more urban areas of our province. And I wonder, my question is to the Minister, if he could share with the House what his plans are to reducing and, if possible, to avoiding these occurrences which seem to be happening more and more often in more recent years in this province.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an excellent question. I thank the member for indicating to me that he would be asking me this question today. I wish that were the case all the time. I want to indicate, first of all, that we deal with a lot of smog in this area, which in fact comes from areas other than the province of Ontario, particularly the Ohio Valley. But there are a number of initiatives that the ministry has undertaken to combat the effects of the buildup of low-level ozone in the province of Ontario. And those include, on June 21st, you will recall the announcement of the lowering of the levels of volatile organic compounds allowed in summer-grade gasoline. And of course, that reduces the evaporation from a car's fuel tank. And these are things that are evaporating are, in fact, the chemical that forms smog. We estimate that Ontario-generated smog from such formation will be reduced by about 8 to 10%. On May 31st of 1989, I announced a province-wide ban on apartment building incinerators, which also make a contribution. They have a number of pollutants that were coming into the atmosphere. In 1987, I adopted a policy of placing all private sector energy from waste facilities under environmental assessment to ensure that best available technology is applied, number one, and number two, to ensure that there's a full scrutiny of it. The Countdown Acid Rain program is extremely important as it reduces by 60% the emissions of sulfur.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. People are calling me and they're concerned about the health aspects of pollution, but they're also concerned about how they can determine in any given day how bad the situation is, how desperate the situation might be. And
if you look up.
Help us sing it and do the actions too.
What's the use of walking round with your eyes stuck to the ground? Worlds of wonders can be found just by looking up. Seabirds flying to the trees, golden leaves dance in the breeze, bright balloons all flying free. When you're looking up, look up. The world seems brighter, look up. Your load seems lighter, look up. Your road seems brighter. Come on, let's do it. Nothing to it. Raindrop, rainbows fill the sky. When the sun comes out to dry, aeroplanes go gliding by. When you're looking up, look up. The world seems brighter, look up. Your road seems lighter, look up. Your road seems brighter. Come on, let's do it. Nothing to it. Building structures, towers tall, give a view to one and all. All your troubles seem so small when you're looking up. When you're looking up, look up. You know, paper airplanes are easy to make, but real planes are not the same. If you look through the polka dot door, you'll see how real planes are made.